My name is Clara Henderson, and I can tell you the exact moment my life split into two parts, the life before that meeting and the life after. Picture this: a sterile conference room at Lincrest Global, a company so proud of its polished glass towers and spotless reputation that even the air smelled like it had been disinfected. Rows of sleek black chairs, a long polished table that reflected the fluorescent lights above. On that morning, the place was full of executives, analysts, assistants, each one with laptops open and faces trained into professional masks. At the far end of the table sat Miranda Vexley. If you have never met a person like her, consider yourself lucky. She was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make people shrink without saying a word. Every hair in place, lipstick the shade of blood-red ambition, and a stare that cut through skin and bone. People called her brilliant, ruthless, efficient. What they really meant was that she had perfected the art of stepping on others until they stopped moving. I was supposed to be the star of that meeting. Months of work, nights of late coffee, weekends sacrificed, all to build a model that finally made sense of what Lincrest kept missing, the human factor. See, Lincrest prided itself on numbers, charts, reports, patterns so neat they looked like they were drawn with a ruler. But clients are not rulers. They are messy, emotional, unpredictable, and I had found a way to map that unpredictability to make sense of it. My project was not just a collection of numbers. It was a story about people, told through data. When my turn came, I stood, my hands steady even though my heart hammered like a trapped bird. I opened my presentation. The screen glowed with the opening slide, human-centered predictive analysis. For the first time, I felt that maybe, just maybe, they would see what I saw. But then Miranda leaned forward. Her voice sliced through the room. "This is irrelevant nonsense," she said, each syllable sharp enough to bleed. "Data should not be polluted with emotions." And before I could defend a single word, she pressed delete. On the screen, my slides vanished into a white void. On my laptop, the folders collapsed, gone. Months of work, gone. I stared at the emptiness, unable to breathe. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. 30 people sat frozen. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Jonas Mayers, who sat 2 chairs down, rubbed the bridge of his nose like he could not believe what just happened. But no one spoke. No one dared to challenge Miranda. That was her power. Not just in what she said, but in the fear she carried like perfume. I swallowed the lump in my throat, my mouth dry as dust. My instinct was to argue, to fight, but another instinct, older, deeper, told me not yet, because this was not the moment to fight. This was the moment to watch, to listen, to let Miranda believe she had won. She turned her smile on me then, the kind of smile that looks sweet but tastes like poison. "Efficiency, Miss Henderson," she said, like she was teaching a child. "Our clients pay for speed and precision, not sentimental distractions. This company was built on discipline, not therapy sessions disguised as analysis." I nodded once. Not agreement. Survival. Inside, a fire began to burn. After the meeting, I walked the hallways like a ghost. Conversations hushed when I passed. Some people gave me sympathetic looks, others avoided my eyes altogether. When I reached my desk, I opened my computer. The folders were still gone. She had not just deleted the presentation. She had deleted the entire database. Notes, charts, correlations, client insights, everything wiped clean. I wanted to scream. Instead, I sat there, hands folded in my lap, pretending nothing had changed. Because the truth was, she had not destroyed my work. Not really. She had destroyed the files, but the knowledge lived in me. And more importantly, it lived in the clients who had trusted me. That night, I went home to my small apartment downtown. The city lights blinked outside like restless stars. I poured myself a glass of wine, set it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it until the surface stilled. I thought about leaving, resigning, walking away from the humiliation, from Miranda, from Lincrest. But then I thought about the people who had called me directly instead of the main line. The ones who trusted me with details of their lives. A sick parent, a child's graduation, a sleepless night before a merger. Those memories could not be deleted. And then I knew I would not run. Miranda believed she had ended me, but what she had really done was plant the seed of her own downfall. Revenge is not always fire and fury. Sometimes it is patience. It is silence. It is letting someone dig their own grave while you stand by and wait. I raised my glass, whispered to the empty room, to storms yet to come, and drank. Because storms were coming, and I was done being afraid. You might think that the story really started that day in the conference room, with Miranda erasing my work. But the truth is, the roots of it reached much deeper. Seeds had been planted long before, and they had been waiting for the right storm to grow. Let me take you back to when I first joined Lincrest Global. On my first day, I walked into that glass tower with a mixture of nerves and hope. Lincrest was famous, after all, one of the most powerful firms in financial analytics. People dreamed of being hired there, dreamed of those gleaming offices, the security, the prestige. My title was Behavioral Data Specialist. It sounded important, but what it really meant was sitting at a desk and sifting through endless logs of client interactions. Emails, survey responses, notes from account managers, dry as dust. Numbers and percentages stripped of anything resembling humanity. The woman training me flipped through a spreadsheet and said, "All you need to care about is completion rate and response time. The rest is noise." Noise, that was how they saw it. But I did not see noise. I saw patterns. Not the kind you graph on a chart, but the kind you feel in your gut when you read between the lines. One of the first cases I handled was a mid-sized investment firm whose CEO, a man named Russell Kramer, had been growing colder in his communications. The official notes said nothing was wrong. His company had renewed contracts 3 years in a row. But when I read through the last 10 emails, I noticed something odd. His sentences were shorter. He used fewer words. His usual sign-off, "Best, Russell," had shrunk to just "best," so I called him. Not because the protocol told me to, but because something felt wrong. He answered on the second ring, his voice weary. I asked about his portfolio, his satisfaction with our reports, the usual questions. He gave me polite answers, nothing out of line. But then, on a hunch, I asked, "How is your daughter adjusting to college?" Silence, then a sigh. "She hates it," he admitted. "She feels lost, and I feel useless because I don't know how to help her." For 20 minutes we talked. Not about contracts or analytics, about his daughter, about fear, about hope. A week later, he signed a renewal contract, not just for 1 year, but for 3. That was the moment I realized the truth. People don't stay with a company because of efficiency metrics. They stay because they feel seen. And little by little, clients began to notice me. They started calling me directly. They told me things they didn't tell anyone else. And those things, those so-called noises, turned into trust. Of course, not everyone liked what I was doing. One evening, months before the infamous meeting, I stayed late at the office. The sun had set, the glass tower reflecting only the neon glow of the city. I was scribbling notes from a call when I felt her presence before I saw her, Miranda. She stood behind me, watching my screen. "What are you doing?" she asked. I explained that I was keeping track of client details, personal notes, things they mentioned in passing, birthdays, anniversaries, family milestones. She frowned, her lips thin. "That's not your job. We're not here to be friends with clients. We're here to deliver results." "But this helps with retention," I said carefully. "People renew because they trust us." Her eyes hardened. "People renew because we are the best, not because you ask about their dogs." That was Miranda. Cold, dismissive, I should have seen it then. The disdain in her eyes, the way she looked at me like I was wasting oxygen. She saw me as a threat, even back then. Jonas noticed too. He was older, a quiet presence in the office, the kind of man people underestimated because he didn't talk much. But he watched. He saw things. One afternoon, after another tense exchange with Miranda, he stopped by my desk. "She doesn't like you," he said bluntly. I gave him a tired smile. "Thanks, I hadn't noticed." "No," he said, leaning closer. "She doesn't like what you represent. You're proving that her way isn't the only way, and she can't stand that." Those words stuck with me. They were a warning, a prophecy, really. And so when the day of the big meeting arrived, I knew it would be difficult. I just didn't know it would be catastrophic. When Miranda deleted my work, she wasn't just deleting files. She was trying to erase the very idea that people mattered more than numbers. She wanted to prove, once and for all, that feelings were weakness. But what she didn't realize, what she could never realize, was that feelings are the strongest currency we have. That night, as I sat in my apartment with the city lights flickering beyond the glass, I thought of every client who had ever trusted me. Every conversation, every moment of vulnerability. And I thought of Miranda's smile as she pressed delete, convinced she had buried me. I whispered to myself, "You've just buried yourself." Because even then, even in the ashes of humiliation, I knew something she didn't. I knew that the strongest revenge isn't screaming or fighting. It's letting the world see who you really are, while your enemy shows who they really are. And soon, very soon, the world was going to see Miranda Vexley for who she truly was. The morning after that disastrous meeting, I walked into the office with a face that betrayed nothing. Inside, my stomach was a knot, but I had learned long ago that weakness at Lincrest was like blood in shark-infested waters. If you bled, you were finished. The atmosphere felt different. People avoided my eyes, whispers trailed behind me like smoke. My desk, once a place where colleagues came with questions or small talk, now felt like an island surrounded by silence. Miranda had achieved what she wanted: isolation, humiliation. But isolation has a strange way of sharpening the mind. When you are no longer distracted by chatter and half-smiles, you start to see the lines of the game more clearly. By noon, an email arrived. A message from Miranda herself. The subject line was clinical, like a knife wrapped in paper. New assignment, immediate. I opened it. She had given me the impossible: a full audit of every client interaction over the last 18 months. Thousands of lines of records, thousands of conversations, thousands of emails. She wanted every single detail logged, categorized, and cross-referenced. Deadline, 3 weeks, 3 weeks. It was punishment disguised as work. She wanted to bury me in data entry until I broke. She wanted me invisible, chained to a spreadsheet, too exhausted to think about anything else. For a moment, I almost laughed. It was too obvious, too petty. But then I remembered Jonas's warning: she doesn't like what you represent. And that was it. This wasn't just about me. It was about proving her worldview right, so I rolled up my sleeves, opened a blank document, and began. Hours passed, days blurred. The office became background noise, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the hum of the air conditioning. I lived inside those records. I read every client log, every call transcript, every survey. And as I did, something happened. Patterns emerged, not the kind Miranda worshipped, cold graphs and quarterly charts, but human patterns. A client's frustration easing after someone listened. A deal saved because of a remembered birthday. A contract renewed after a single personal check-in. Noise wasn't noise, it was the music of connection. I began to build something new, a report not just of numbers but of stories tied to outcomes. Proof that the so-called inefficiencies Miranda despised were directly responsible for millions in revenue. Late one night, long after most of the building had emptied, Jonas appeared at my desk. He leaned against the cubicle wall, his tie loosened, eyes tired but sharp. "You're still here," he said. I didn't look up. "So are you?" He smiled faintly. "Fair, but you should know people are talking. They think Miranda's setting you up to fail." "She is," I said simply, "but she won't succeed." Jonas studied me for a long moment. "You know, Clara, most people would have quit by now." I finally looked at him. "Most people don't know what I know." "And what's that?" "That the moment you let someone silence you, you've already lost, and I'm not losing." He nodded slowly, as if weighing my words. Then he said, "Careful. If you prove her wrong, she'll come at you harder." "I know," and I did, but what choice did I have? For 3 weeks, I worked like a woman possessed. Every detail went into that audit. Every conversation tied to an outcome. Every so-called distraction turned into measurable success. When I finally finished, the report was 55 pages long, heavy with evidence that human connection wasn't a weakness, it was a weapon. The day I submitted it, I slid the document onto Miranda's desk. She didn't even glance at it before shoving it aside. Her smile was cool. "We'll review it in next week's meeting." I knew that smile. I had seen it before, the day she deleted my work. Something inside me whispered that another storm was coming. And I was right. The conference room was colder than usual the day Miranda decided to use my own work against me. Maybe it was the air conditioning, maybe it was just the weight of her presence, pressing down like frost on glass. I sat near the middle of the table, 55 pages of my report loaded onto the screen. My stomach tightened, but outwardly I looked calm. That was the game at Lincrest. You could be crumbling inside, but your face had to be a mask of marble. Miranda stood at the front, perfectly tailored suit, her voice crisp as glass breaking. "Today," she announced, "we will review a recent audit of client interactions. It will serve as a case study for how not to waste company time." A murmur went through the room. My heart thudded once hard. I knew then this was not going to be recognition. It was going to be execution. She clicked through the pages, each one full of careful notes I had poured myself into. "This," she said, pointing to a highlighted section, "is an example of inefficiency. A 30-minute call with a client of which 20 minutes were spent discussing a dog's health. Is that professional? Is that scalable? No, it is sloppy." Laughter rippled across the room, uncomfortable and nervous. I felt heat rise in my chest. I wanted to speak to defend myself, but her voice cut on, relentless. "Here," she said, moving to another page. "A handwritten note celebrating a client's anniversary. This is not a greeting card company. This is Lincrest Global. We deal in data, not birthday wishes." My throat ached. Every example she dragged into the light was something I had done with care, with purpose. She twisted it into incompetence. Jonas sat across from me. His jaw was tight, his eyes flicking from Miranda to me with quiet fury, but he stayed silent. Everyone did, and then came the worst moment. She pulled up the summary page, the one that showed the additional revenue linked directly to these so-called inefficiencies. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, contracts saved, accounts expanded. This, she said coldly, is meaningless correlation. Revenue comes from quality services, not sentimental chatter. These numbers are accidental, not intentional. To pretend otherwise is unprofessional. And then, in front of all of them, she dragged her cursor to the corner of the file. Her finger hovered over the delete button. This entire approach is garbage, she declared. Starting today, we return to professional, efficient client communication protocols. No more wasted time. No more unproductive small talk. No more childish indulgences. And she clicked. The screen went blank. 55 pages of evidence gone, months of my life erased with a keystroke. Silence. Not even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to exist anymore. 30 pairs of eyes avoided mine. Some looked sympathetic, others relieved it wasn't them, but not one person spoke up. Miranda turned, her expression one of satisfied triumph. Does anyone have questions about the new standards? I clenched my fists under the table. My nails dug into my palms until it hurt, a sharp reminder that I was still here, still breathing, still alive. Jonas shifted as if he might say something but stopped. His eyes met mine for half a second. In that glance, I read everything: anger, pity, warning. I forced myself to meet Miranda's gaze. No questions, I said, my voice calm, steady. For a flicker of a moment, her eyes narrowed as if she had expected me to break down. She wanted tears. She wanted humiliation. She didn't get it. The meeting ended. People shuffled out quickly, murmuring low. I gathered my things slowly, deliberately, refusing to rush like someone running from shame. As I walked out, Jonas fell into step beside me. That was brutal, he muttered under his breath. That was predictable, I replied. She's pushing too far, Clara, you know that, right? Yes, I paused at the elevator doors. And she thinks she's winning, but she is. The elevator dinged. I stepped inside. As the doors closed, I caught Jonas's face one last time, half worried, half curious. What I didn't tell him was this. When Miranda deleted that report, she didn't realize she had just deleted the only thing holding Lincrest's biggest clients in place. Those connections lived in people, not files. And once those people realized what had been taken from them, the cracks would begin. That was the spark. Not fire yet, but fire was coming. And in the smoke of that meeting, in the silence of my colleagues, I could already see the outline of something bigger. Something that would make Miranda regret ever underestimating me. There are moments in life when you start to believe that the universe is finally tilting in your favor. For me, that moment came in the form of a single email. It was a Tuesday morning. The office smelled faintly of burnt coffee, and the usual low murmur of keyboards and phone calls filled the air. My inbox was crowded with meaningless reports and updates, but one subject line froze me in place. Executive presentation invitation, confidential. I blinked. Once, twice, then opened it. The sender, Adrian Cole, the CEO himself. His words were brief, formal, but they lit a spark in me I hadn't felt in weeks. Clara, we would like you to present your recent work on client retention strategies directly to the executive board this Friday. Please prepare a full deck and be ready to discuss implementation at scale. I read it again, afraid I had imagined it. But no, the email was real. Adrian Cole knew my name, he knew my work, and he wanted me in the boardroom. For the first time since Miranda had dragged my reputation through the mud, I felt something I thought I had lost completely: hope. Jonas noticed it immediately. He stopped by my desk, one eyebrow raised. You look like someone just offered you a golden ticket. What happened? I turned the screen toward him. He leaned in, scanned the email, and let out a low whistle. The board, Clara, that's huge. I know, I whispered, my heart racing, but his expression darkened. Be careful. If Miranda finds out, she already knows, I cut him off, glancing toward her office. The glass walls gave her a clear view of the entire floor, like a hawk perched above a field. Jonas followed my gaze. She won't let this slide. I don't intend to give her a choice. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. I rebuilt everything Miranda had erased. I pulled long nights, reconstructing models from memory, recreating client stories, reassembling the proof that empathy wasn't inefficiency, it was leverage. I built a presentation that wasn't just numbers. It was alive. And for the first time, I let myself imagine a future where I wasn't constantly fighting to justify my existence. By the morning of the presentation, I was exhausted, but determined. I wore a dark blue suit, pressed to perfection, and tied my hair back in a way that said I was not here to be dismissed. My reflection in the elevator mirror looked calm, composed, even though my pulse thudded like a war drum. The boardroom was intimidating, even more so than I'd imagined. Long table of polished oak, walls of glass overlooking the city. At the head sat Adrian Cole, mid-50s, sharp eyes softened by a hint of warmth. He greeted me with a nod. Beside him sat Victor Lang, the CFO. He was a different presence entirely. Angular face, lips pressed into a thin line, eyes like cold steel. The kind of man who measured people the same way he measured numbers, by their utility. Other directors and senior partners filled the seats. Their conversations hushed as I connected my laptop to the screen. "Miss Henderson," Adrian said, "please go ahead." I took a breath. Then I began. At first, my voice was shaky. But as the slides unfolded, my nerves steadied. I showed them retention rates climbing when clients felt understood. I connected stories to outcomes, small gestures to major contracts. I wove numbers with narratives until the room leaned forward, listening not to a statistician, but to a storyteller. And for once, they listened. When I finished, silence filled the room. I waited, heart pounding, until Adrian leaned back with a slow smile. "This," he said, "is precisely the kind of innovation Lincrest needs. Data with humanity, strategy with empathy. Well done, Miss Henderson." The words washed over me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Around the table, heads nodded. Even Victor Lang, though his expression was unreadable, tapped his pen once against his notebook. Not approval exactly, more like calculation. I gathered my things and stepped out of the boardroom, lightheaded with relief. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe I had won. That maybe the tide was finally turning. But Lincrest has a way of turning victories into traps. Because in Lincrest, nothing is ever truly yours. And in the shadows of that boardroom, as Victor's cold gaze lingered on me for a fraction too long, I missed the first clue. The clue that my victory had already been stolen. The glow of that boardroom victory clung to me for 2 whole days. 2 days of walking through the office with my shoulders straighter, my steps lighter. People noticed. A few colleagues even smiled at me again, small tentative gestures like they were testing whether it was safe to acknowledge me. Jonas gave me a rare grin as we crossed paths near the elevators. "I heard the board liked your presentation." "They did," I said, still trying not to sound too triumphant. "Good," he said, voice low. "You deserve that." For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe that maybe things were changing. Maybe all the silence and humiliation had been worth it, but hope can be cruel. Friday morning, an all-hands meeting was called, the kind of meeting that made everyone nervous because they were rare. The entire department filed into the big conference hall, a space with tiered seating and a massive screen at the front. Miranda was already there, standing near the podium, immaculate as always. Her red lipstick was fresh, her posture perfect. She radiated control. "Today," she announced as the room filled, "I want to share with you an exciting new direction for our client relations strategy." My chest warmed. This had to be it. She was about to present what I had shown to the board, and maybe, just maybe, she would give me credit. The screen lit up. Slides appeared, my slides, not word for word, not exactly. She had polished them, stripped away the details that made them mine, smoothed the edges until they looked corporate and cold. But I knew every chart, every story, every line of logic. They were mine, and she was presenting them as hers. I sat frozen as she spoke, my throat tight. "This model," Miranda explained, her voice calm and authoritative, "represents months of my work to integrate emotional data with financial analytics. By focusing on human behavior, we can predict retention more accurately and drive long-term revenue." Months of her work, I glanced around the room, colleagues nodded impressed, some scribbled notes. Jonas caught my eye, his brows furrowed, but he stayed silent. Miranda clicked to the next slide. "This approach was received positively by the executive board earlier this week, and we have been given approval to scale it across departments." Approval, recognition, power, all things that should have been mine. But the knife twisted deeper. A hand went up in the audience. One of the analysts asked, "Isn't this similar to what Clara presented in her earlier audit?" For one heartbeat silence, my breath caught. Miranda didn't miss a beat. Her smile was smooth as silk. "Miss Henderson did make some preliminary attempts, yes. Unfortunately, those efforts lacked methodological rigor and were deemed unprofessional. What you see here is the refined version I have been developing for months." Laughter rippled through the audience, low but sharp. Heads turned toward me, some with pity, others with smugness. Heat flushed through my face, but I forced myself to sit still. If I reacted, I would confirm her story. If I fought back, I would look desperate. Miranda's voice carried on, confident, unshakable. She owned the room. And then, at the very end, Adrian Cole himself stepped in from the back of the hall. He applauded politely. "Excellent work, Miranda. This is exactly the kind of innovation we need." My stomach dropped. Of course, she hadn't just stolen my work. She had arranged the timing so that by the time the board praised it, the story had already been rewritten. It was hers. And no one contradicted her. Not Adrian, not the directors, not anyone. Well, almost no one. I caught Victor Lang watching me from across the room. His face was impassive, his eyes sharp, calculating. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look impressed. He looked complicit. The way his gaze lingered on Miranda, the subtle nod he gave her as she stepped down from the podium, it wasn't admiration. It was acknowledgement. That was when I understood. She wasn't acting alone. Victor had known, maybe even orchestrated it. And if the CFO of Lincrest was on her side, then this wasn't just about me and Miranda. It was about something bigger. After the meeting, Jonas found me at my desk. His voice was low, urgent. "Clara, that was your work. Everyone knows it." "Knowing doesn't matter," I said flatly. "She's got the credit and the board believes her." He clenched his fists. "You can't just let her. What would you have me do? Stand up in that room and call her a thief? Without proof, they'd laugh me out of the building." Jonas hesitated, then lowered his voice even more. "I saw Lang. He was watching you. There's something there." I stared at my blank screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. I know. In that moment, humiliation curdled into something colder. Resolve. They thought they had silenced me. They thought they had buried me beneath lies and politics. But what they didn't know was that seeds grow best in the dark. And the deeper they buried me, the stronger those roots would become. When you're humiliated in public, the shame doesn't fade overnight. It lingers, clings to you like smoke on your clothes, even when you've left the fire far behind. For days after Miranda's grand reveal, I walked through the office in a haze. Every glance felt like judgment. Every laugh in the hallway felt like it was aimed at me. It wasn't paranoia, people had seen the spectacle. They had watched her strip my work bare, repaint it with her own colors, and claim it as hers. And the worst part, they had applauded. I buried myself in routine tasks, keeping my head down, doing the work no one else wanted to do. Spreadsheets, client reports, endless chains of emails. I spoke only when spoken to. I told myself it was survival, but survival felt a lot like drowning. Jonas tried in his quiet way to keep me anchored. One evening, as most of the floor emptied, he stopped at my desk. "You can't keep doing this," he said. "Doing what?" I didn't look up from my screen. "Pretending you're invisible. You're not. And the longer you let her control the narrative, the harder it'll be to get out from under it." His words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. I closed my laptop and rubbed my temples. "What would you have me do, Jonas? Stand on the table and shout, 'She stole my work'? No one would believe me. They'd call it sour grapes." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Not everyone buys her story. People talk. Quietly, but they talk." I looked at him then, searching his face. "And you?" "I know it was yours," he said simply. "But knowing isn't enough. You need something bigger." I didn't ask what he meant because I didn't have the strength to think about it. Not yet. That night I stayed late again, the office nearly deserted. My screen glowed in the darkness, spreadsheets blurring before my tired eyes. At some point my phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Clara Henderson?" a smooth voice asked. "Yes. This is Alina Carter. I represent Nexa Dynamics. We've been following your work." My heart skipped. My work. "Yes, specifically your presentation to the Lincrest board last week." I gripped the edge of my desk. "That wasn't credited to me." A pause, then Alina said, her tone firm, "We know." Silence stretched between us. My pulse pounded in my ears. She continued, "We've been watching Lincrest for months. Watching you, the model you built, the approach you designed, it's what the industry needs. Lincrest doesn't deserve it, but we'd like to offer you a place where it will be valued." Nexa Dynamics, I'd heard of them. A rising startup, smaller but agile, known for bold moves and disruptive ideas. The kind of company that made giants nervous. "What exactly are you offering?" I asked cautiously. "A leadership role," Alina said. "Director of Behavioral Analytics. Full autonomy to develop and implement your model. Competitive salary, equity options, a team of your own." I leaned back in my chair, stunned. My eyes drifted across the empty office, the rows of desks where people avoided my gaze, the glass-walled corner where Miranda reigned. It was tempting, more than tempting. It was everything I'd wanted since I first realized Lincrest didn't care about people, but doubt tugged at me. "Why me? Why now?" Elena's voice softened. Because we believe timing matters. Lincrest doesn't see you, but we do. And we think it's only a matter of time before their clients see you too. Her words sent a shiver down my spine, because she was right. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The city glittered beyond the windows, each light a reminder of lives moving forward while I was trapped in place. For the first time since Miranda had pressed delete on my work, I felt a door creak open. A way out, a way forward. But I also knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. About showing Miranda and the ones who protected her that you can't erase people and expect them to vanish. And so, for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine leaving Lincrest behind. Not in defeat, in triumph. The following evening, I found myself sitting in a cafe downtown, the kind of place that smelled of roasted beans and ambition. I had agreed to meet Elena Carter in person, though a part of me still wondered if I was walking into a trap. She arrived right on time. Tall, poised, her handshake firm, not corporate stiff like Miranda, but sharp in a way that suggested she'd built her reputation claw by claw. Behind her came two others, Raj Patel, Nexa's head of operations, and Mia Alvarez, their lead strategist. They were younger than most Lincrest executives, hungrier too. "Clara," Elena said warmly, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thank you for meeting us." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "It feels risky." "Everything worth doing feels risky at first," she replied smoothly. They ordered coffee, then wasted no time. Elena leaned forward, eyes bright. "We've been building Nexa for 5 years. We've taken on giants twice our size and won. But we know the next leap requires something different. A philosophy, not just a product. That's where you come in." Mia chimed in. "Your model isn't just analysis, it's a shift in mindset. You proved people aren't numbers. They're the reason numbers exist. We want that philosophy to define Nexa." I stared at them, my fingers tightening around the warm cup. "You make it sound like a revolution." "It is," Raj said, "and revolutions need leaders." Their words thrilled me but also terrified me. At Lincrest, I was invisible, erased. Here, they wanted to put me at the center. "What if I'm wrong?" I asked quietly. "What if it doesn't work?" Elena's smile was steady. "Then we fail trying something worth failing for, but we don't think you're wrong. We think you're ahead of your time." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My chest felt tight, like I was holding my breath underwater. They left me with a contract to review, sleek and professional, but it wasn't the numbers on the page that haunted me, it was the possibility. When I returned to the office the next morning, Miranda was waiting near my desk. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there with that cold smile, the one that said she already owned the air you breathed. "Busy these days?" She asked casually. "As always," I said, forcing calm. Her eyes flicked to my phone as if she knew about the call, the meeting, the offer. My skin prickled. "Careful not to overextend yourself," she said softly. "This company values discipline. Wandering minds rarely last here." And then she walked away, heels clicking like gunshots. Jonas appeared minutes later as if summoned by my thoughts. He leaned against the cubicle wall, lowering his voice. What did she want? "To remind me she's watching," I said. He studied me, then asked, "And what do you want?" The question cut deeper than I expected. What did I want? To stay? To fight her on her own turf? Or to leave, risk everything, and start over? I sighed. "Nexa made me an offer." Jonas's eyes widened, but he didn't look surprised. "Are you going to take it?" "I don't know." "Clara," he said, his voice firm now, "I've worked here 15 years. I've seen people try to change the system from within. They all failed. Lincrest doesn't change, it consumes. If you stay, it'll swallow you too." I looked at him, the one person who had never doubted me. "You think I should go?" "I think," he said carefully, "you deserve to be somewhere your ideas aren't treated like trash, somewhere they're yours." That night, I sat by my apartment window, staring at the city skyline. My laptop glowed with the contract from Nexa. Words swam before my eyes: equity, autonomy, director. But it wasn't the title or the salary that swayed me. It was the thought of walking into an office where no one laughed at empathy, where no one deleted my work out of spite, where no one stole my voice. I thought of Miranda, her cruel smile as she took what was mine. I thought of Victor Lang, his silent approval as she did it. And I realized that staying at Lincrest would mean playing a game rigged against me. Leaving wasn't surrender. Leaving was choosing a new battlefield. At midnight, I picked up my pen, signed my name on the contract, and felt a weight lift from my chest. I whispered into the quiet, "You wanted me invisible, Miranda, but you just made me unstoppable." The storm had finally found its direction, and it was heading straight for Lincrest. I remember the first time I heard whispers about contracts slipping through Miranda's fingers. It was late on a Tuesday evening, and the city lights stretched across the skyline like fractured glass. I was sitting in Nexa's modest office, still humming with the excitement of building something new, when Jonas called me. His voice was low, careful, as though he worried the walls around him at Lincrest might be listening. "Clara, you won't believe what happened in today's leadership meeting." Miranda tried to reassure the board that client renewals were strong, but two of the biggest contracts have already pulled out. They were gone before she even walked into the room. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words sink in. 2 major contracts. Not small accounts, not trial projects. These were the kind of deals that had once been touted as proof of Lincrest's dominance in the market. Hearing that they had walked away so quietly was like watching the first crack spread across a pane of glass. You know the rest will follow. Of course, I didn't celebrate. At least not outwardly. I told Jonas I appreciated the update, thanked him for taking the risk of sharing, and then stared at the ceiling of our office for a long time. There's a peculiar kind of satisfaction in watching the tide turn, especially when you know you don't have to lift a single finger. But there's also a pang of sadness, because I remembered how much of myself I had once given to Lincrest. Miranda, though, would never admit weakness. Jonas explained how she brushed off concerns, insisting the departures were anomalies, that our competitors had engaged in unethical practices to lure them away. She presented colorful slides full of graphs, all designed to reassure Adrian and the rest of the board that Lincrest was stable. The truth was slipping out faster than she could patch it. The following week, another client left. This one made the news. I was scrolling through an industry newsletter when I saw the headline, "Kavanaugh Holdings Ends Partnership with Lincrest Global." The article praised their decision to pursue fresh and innovative collaboration with a competitor, though it didn't name who. I knew before I even finished the first paragraph that they were coming our way. Sure enough, my phone buzzed later that afternoon. It was an unfamiliar number, but when I answered, I heard the warm and deliberate voice of Leonard Kavanaugh himself. "Clara, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just wanted to say how refreshing it is to see you at Nexa. We've been watching from a distance, and I'd like to schedule a meeting about exploring opportunities." I smiled even though he couldn't see me. I told him, of course, that I'd be honored. And after the call ended, I sat in silence for a while, trying to absorb the gravity of it. This was a multi-million-dollar account, one Miranda had once boasted about securing personally. Now it was slipping directly into my lap, and not because I had lured it. I hadn't even knocked on their door. They came to me, like water seeking its natural path. Jonas kept me updated about the chaos at Lincrest. He described the way Miranda stormed through the halls after that loss, barking orders at her staff, demanding revised reports that could explain away the numbers. She rewrote entire summaries before presenting them to Adrian. According to Jonas, she even manipulated revenue projections, stretching optimistic forecasts into supposed guarantees. But you can't lie to reality for long. When Kavanaugh's exit made it into the press, other clients began asking questions. If a giant like them had abandoned Lincrest, what did that say about the company's future? Within days, nervous calls started pouring in. Adrian wanted answers. The board wanted explanations. And Miranda, she doubled down. Jonas said her words during the emergency meeting were sharp enough to cut glass. "We are not losing control," she told them. "We are innovating, and sometimes clients are not ready for that innovation. It is not a weakness of Lincrest, but of their vision." It must have sounded powerful in the room, but outside, the numbers told a different story. At Nexa, meanwhile, we worked quietly, steadily. Our office was still smaller, but the energy was unlike anything I had ever felt at Lincrest. Ideas bounced off the walls like sparks. We experimented, tested, iterated, and laughed even when the hours stretched late into the night. It felt like building a family, not just a company. Every time a new client approached us, I reminded myself not to gloat. I didn't need to. Their arrival spoke louder than any victory speech I could ever give. They came because they felt seen, understood, remembered. That had always been the difference. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about Miranda. I pictured her in those vast, glass-walled conference rooms, standing tall in her tailored suits, clutching her slides, insisting on her version of the truth. I imagined the stiffness in her voice when she realized the audience no longer believed her. And I wondered, did she think of me at all in those moments? Did my name echo in her head when the contracts dissolved? Jonas seemed to think so. One evening, he confessed that Miranda had lashed out in frustration during a closed session, saying, Clara poisoned them before she left. She infected their minds with her sentimental nonsense. Sentimental nonsense. That was what she called the empathy I had built entire strategies around. I laughed when Jonas told me, though it was a bitter laugh, because she still didn't understand. She never would. The pressure on Miranda escalated quickly. By mid-quarter, Lincrest had lost nearly a third of its high-value contracts. Their stock price dipped. Whispers spread in the financial press. Analysts began to question whether the company had grown too rigid, too top-heavy to adapt. Miranda's response? She staged a showcase. According to Jonas, she orchestrated an elaborate client event in New York. Grand ballroom, polished speeches, banners announcing Lincrest's new era of innovation. She forced the marketing team to churn out glossy brochures overnight, promising revolutionary data analytics platforms that didn't actually exist yet. But reality has a way of seeping through the cracks of even the best stage performance. During the event, technical glitches exposed the prototypes as half-baked. A demo froze on screen in front of dozens of potential clients. Investors whispered in the back rows. And Miranda, ever proud, kept her chin lifted as though nothing had gone wrong. The board wasn't fooled. Jonas called me after that disastrous showcase. He sounded more exhausted than I had ever heard him. Clara, it's like watching someone drown while still insisting they're winning a race. She keeps spinning stories, but nobody believes her anymore. Adrian looks pale every time she opens her mouth. The other executives are starting to question whether she even knows what's happening. I didn't say much. I just listened, then thanked him again for keeping me informed. When I hung up, I stared out of Nex's office window. The night was thick with fog, blurring the lights into indistinct halos. For the first time, I felt a flicker of pity. But only a flicker. Because then I remembered the look on her face when she deleted my project in front of everyone, the smirk that said she believed she had won, that I was nothing. That memory was enough to steel my resolve. As Lincrest declined, Nexa flourished. Our client list expanded faster than we had projected. The very accounts Miranda tried to hold with iron fists slipped easily into our hands, not because we pulled, but because they let go. We built tools that actually worked, crafted around the needs people had voiced to me in hundreds of conversations back when I was still at Lincrest. One evening, as I reviewed a proposal draft, Jonas texted me a single sentence. "She is lying to the board again." It didn't surprise me. He later told me she had doctored revenue charts, inflating renewals that hadn't even been signed. She shifted columns, relabeled categories, anything to buy more time. But time is the one resource you can't forge. What struck me most was how quickly her empire crumbled without me ever laying a hand. It wasn't revenge born of sabotage. It wasn't war. It was silence, patience, and inevitability. The structures she believed unshakable were built on sand. The moment the tide rose, they collapsed. And as I sat in Nex's buzzing office late into the nights, surrounded by colleagues who believed in something bigger than themselves, I realized the sweetest revenge wasn't watching her fail. It was knowing I had already moved beyond her reach. Yet her fall wasn't complete. Not yet. The real storm, Jonas promised me, was only beginning. The stories of Lincrest's unraveling reached me almost daily now. It was as if the professional world couldn't stop whispering about it. Trade journals published thinly veiled commentaries, consultants speculated on podcasts, and analysts hinted at serious structural weaknesses inside the once impenetrable fortress of the company. Every headline was another nail in the coffin Miranda had built for herself. Jonas became my constant line of sight into the chaos. He told me about meetings that turned into shouting matches, about junior staff who quietly updated their resumes during lunch breaks, about executives slipping out of the building with shoulders heavy as if they carried bricks. One afternoon, he called me from his car, voice sharp with adrenaline. "Clara, you won't believe this. Miranda just presented a quarterly forecast that showed growth. Growth, as if we haven't lost half our top clients already. The board is fuming." Adrian looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. I let out a long breath. It was almost comical, except nothing about it was funny. Because behind those lies were people, employees whose jobs depended on those contracts, clients who deserved honesty, shareholders who trusted their money was safe. Miranda was gambling with lives, not just numbers. Her desperation escalated into paranoia. According to Jonas, she started micromanaging every department, demanding daily reports, calling managers at midnight to ask about numbers that hadn't changed since the morning. She accused employees of sabotage whenever results didn't match her expectations. People were terrified. Productivity didn't rise, it collapsed. who can work under the constant shadow of blame, who can innovate when fear stalks the office halls like a predator, I remembered those same feelings. That tightness in my chest whenever she passed my desk, the way her eyes scanned documents not to understand but to find a flaw to weaponize. I had lived in that storm once. Now the entire company was trapped in it. And the irony? She believed she was the victim. Jonah said she muttered often that someone was orchestrating a conspiracy against her. Sometimes she even said my name, Clara Henderson. She poisoned this place before she left. The words made me laugh in private. Because if building authentic relationships was poison, then yes, I was guilty. And I would poison every company I ever touched with empathy and respect, because that was the antidote to everything Miranda represented. The external cracks widened. A major trade association announced they were suspending collaboration with Lincrest. They cited lack of transparency and consistency in communication. That kind of phrasing is polite code for "we don't trust you anymore." Investors started withdrawing. Stock value plummeted. The financial press smelled blood, and suddenly every article seemed to sharpen its teeth. Nexa, on the other hand, rode the opposite wave. Our offices buzzed with new projects, the kind of contracts that carried not just numbers but enthusiasm. Clients weren't just signing papers, they were telling their friends, their colleagues, their networks about us. It spread like wildfire, and still, I didn't chase them. They came of their own accord. I only received them with open hands. But Miranda wasn't done performing. Jonas described the way she staged another grand illusion, this time in front of the board itself. She printed glossy binders filled with charts, all artificially colored to show growth. She hired a consultant to deliver a flashy presentation about market momentum. She even rehearsed her tone, lowering her voice, pausing dramatically as if performance could outweigh reality. Adrian, though, had grown pale. He wasn't swallowing it anymore. The rest of the board exchanged looks, silent signals of disbelief. And when Jonas told me how Miranda wrapped up her speech, arms spread wide, declaring, "This is only the beginning of Lincrest's brightest chapter," I nearly choked on my coffee, because the beginning of the end had already arrived. The downfall became personal for her soon after. Jonas relayed that department heads began to resign. Some left quietly, slipping away without goodbye parties. Others wrote pointed letters, criticizing the toxic leadership. One director apparently called her out during a meeting, saying, "You treat data like makeup, Miranda. You smear it on to hide the truth, but the cracks are still visible." I wish I had been there to see her face, but word spreads fast. Within days, the industry knew Lincrest was bleeding from inside. Recruiters circled the waters, poaching talent. Clients accelerated their exits. It was a feeding frenzy. One evening, after a long day at Nexa, I sat by my window watching the city pulse with light. I thought about Miranda sitting somewhere across town, probably alone with her spreadsheets, trying to bend reality into a shape she could control. And for the first time, I didn't feel pity. I felt inevitability, because this wasn't about me anymore. This wasn't even about revenge. This was about a system rotting under the weight of arrogance. Miranda had built her empire on fear and performance, not on truth. And when the storm came, there was nothing to hold it together. But the sweetest part, I didn't have to lift a finger. All I did was walk away. And that simple act, choosing integrity over humiliation, choosing vision over obedience, had set everything else into motion. Miranda's decline was not a battle I fought. It was a mirror she held to herself. Jonas's last call that month carried a tone of certainty. "Clara, the board is no longer asking if she's failing. They're asking how long they can afford to let her stay." I closed my eyes and let the words wash over me. This was the climax of inevitability, the moment before the collapse. I knew the final act was coming soon. And deep down, I knew Miranda wouldn't fall alone. Someone had been holding her up all this time. Someone powerful. Jonas hinted as much before we ended the call. When the board finally tears away the mask, he said, "You'll see it wasn't just Miranda." And just like that, the path to the next revelation, the second twist of this story, began to glow ahead of me. I had thought Miranda's downfall would be enough. I had pictured her walking out of Lincrest in disgrace, her career shattered by the very arrogance that had once seemed unshakable. But the truth, as it turned out, was far more complicated, because Miranda wasn't working alone. She never had been. I didn't see it at first. None of us did. All we saw was her face at the front of the room, her sharp voice cutting through the air, her relentless pursuit of power. She looked like a woman who answered to no one. But in reality, someone had been protecting her all along. Someone high enough to shield her when the evidence of her failures grew impossible to ignore. Jonas was the first to hint at it. Clara, he told me one night over a hushed call, the board should have removed her weeks ago. Any other executive in her position would have been gone, but she's still there. Still strutting through the halls, still barking orders, still twisting numbers into stories. It doesn't add up. I asked him what he thought that meant. It means she has a guardian angel, he said grimly. And I'm starting to think it's not just loyalty. There's leverage. The idea gnawed at me. Who at the top would stake their reputation on Miranda? Who would risk the credibility of the entire company just to keep her in power? The obvious answer was Adrian. He was the CEO, the one who had suspended me after trusting her over me. But no, Adrian was a visionary, not a conspirator. He had been dazzled by her performance once, yes, but Jonas told me his patience had worn thin. Adrian had started questioning her more directly in meetings, pressing her on details she couldn't fake. That didn't sound like someone protecting her. So who? The question haunted me. Then came the board meeting that changed everything. Jonas described it in detail, whispering like a man revealing state secrets. The board had cornered Miranda with undeniable facts: 3 major accounts gone, 2 more preparing to exit, and a forecast so wildly inaccurate it was practically fiction. She should have been finished right there, but instead of crumbling, Miranda smiled. "Do you really want to challenge me on this?" she asked them. The room fell silent. And then, to everyone's astonishment, one of the board members spoke up, not to question her, but to defend her. It was Harold Drayton, the chief financial officer. Jonas's voice shook as he relayed it. Clara, he cut off the discussion. He told the board Miranda had been acting with his full knowledge, that her adjustments to the numbers were part of a broader financial strategy, and that anyone who doubted her was doubting him. My stomach clenched when I heard it. The CFO? Of course. Harold Drayton had always been a quiet presence at Lincrest, deliberate and calm. He spoke rarely, but when he did, people listened. He controlled the financial narrative, and that gave him power no one dared question. If he stood behind Miranda, then her lies were no longer just her lies, they were institutional. This was the twist I hadn't seen coming. Jonas told me the rest in fragments, his frustration palpable. Drayton insisted that Miranda's innovative client strategies were essential for long-term growth, even if they looked unstable in the short term. He framed her failures as bold risks, her deceptions as necessary optimism. It was maddening, Jonas said. Half the board looked unconvinced, but the other half seemed hesitant to cross him. He's too valuable, too entrenched. If he says Miranda stays, she stays. I felt the weight of those words pressing on my chest. It wasn't just Miranda anymore. It was the system. The rot went deeper than I had believed. That night, I sat in Nex's office long after everyone had gone home. The city outside was quiet, its neon glow reflecting off the glass walls. And I realized that this story had never been about one arrogant woman. It had been about the culture that enabled her. A culture that preferred polished lies over uncomfortable truths. Miranda wasn't the disease. She was a symptom. And Harold Drayton was the infection that kept it alive. But every secret has its crack. Jonas promised me that cracks were forming. People inside Lincrest were starting to question Drayton's motives. Why would the CFO risk everything for her? Was it personal, political, or something darker? He told me about an overheard conversation, fragments caught in the cafeteria, Drayton and Miranda arguing in low tones. Words like exposure and cover and compliance slipped out before they noticed the ears around them. Jonas couldn't prove anything yet. But he was watching. And so was I from the outside, piecing the puzzle together. Because here was the truth. If Miranda fell, Drayton fell with her. And when the collapse came, it wouldn't be one person hitting the ground, it would be the entire rotten structure they had built together. And I was ready to watch every brick come down. I couldn't sleep after Jonas told me about Harold Drayton. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the low hum of the city outside my window. The thought of Miranda being propped up by someone so powerful, so respected, twisted my stomach. It wasn't just her arrogance anymore, it was corruption. The next morning I sat with a coffee that had gone cold in my hands, replaying Jonas's words. Harold had vouched for her. Harold had turned her lies into company strategy. That was why the board hadn't acted sooner. It was like she had been playing a dangerous game all along, but the house was rigged in her favor. But the thing about a rigged house is this: when it collapses, it takes everyone down with it. A week later, Jonas called me again. His voice carried the weight of someone who had witnessed something unforgettable. "Clara, it's worse than I thought." He paused, then lowered his tone. "I think Drayton's been cooking the books." I felt a chill slide down my spine. He explained what he had pieced together. revenue numbers that didn't align with client activity. Expenses shifted from one department to another, disappearing from scrutiny. Forecasts that magically balanced just enough to keep shareholders calm. And through it all, Miranda smiling, acting as if she had everything under control. But Jonas was careful. He didn't have hard proof yet. Only patterns, hints, whispers. Enough to suspect, but not enough to accuse. Still, the picture was forming in my mind. Miranda wasn't a rogue executive after all. She was a pawn, protected by Drayton because her lies supported his. And together, they had built a facade so elaborate that even the sharpest eyes had been fooled. Meanwhile, Nexa kept growing. Every time a new client walked through our doors, I thought about the ones leaving Lincrest. They weren't just chasing innovation, they were fleeing instability. They could smell the rot. And each contract signed with us was another wound for Miranda and Drayton to bandage. But the bandages were running out. Jonas told me morale at Lincrest had cratered. Employees whispered in corners, avoided eye contact in elevators, and flinched when Miranda's heels clicked across the marble floors. Rumors about Drayton spread like wildfire. Some believed he and Miranda were covering up a massive shortfall. Others thought they were funneling money into secret projects. Nobody knew for sure, but everyone felt the tension, the kind that makes your chest tight before a storm breaks. The storm came during a board audit. Jonas wasn't in the room, but he heard from someone who was. The auditors presented findings that didn't align with Drayton's reports. Numbers were missing. Accounts looked inflated. Projections had no basis in reality. The board pressed Miranda first. She stumbled through excuses, talking about market cycles and client hesitation. But the auditors weren't interested in theories, they wanted facts. When they turned to Drayton, the room held its breath. And Drayton defended her again. He told them the discrepancies were temporary, that the models were being recalibrated, that everything would balance in the next quarter. But then one of the auditors pulled out an email. It was from Miranda to Drayton, instructing him to reclassify certain client revenues to cover losses. And Drayton had replied with a single word. Done. Jonas said the room froze. You could almost hear the blood drain from faces. That was the crack. For weeks they had managed to hold the walls upright with their hands, but this was the moment the bricks started falling. The board demanded a deeper investigation. Adrian, who had been quiet for too long, finally spoke up. He wanted transparency. He wanted answers. And for the first time, Miranda didn't look untouchable. She looked cornered. Jonas described the shift vividly. She's unraveling, Clara. She still walks tall, but her voice shakes. Drayton tries to cover for her, but the board is losing patience with both of them. People are whispering about replacements. It's only a matter of time. I felt my heart pound as he spoke. Because this was the moment I had been waiting for, not just Miranda's downfall, but the exposure of the entire rotten alliance. And yet, I knew something else too. People like Miranda and Drayton don't go quietly. They claw, they scrape, they drag others down with them. The end wouldn't be clean. It would be violent, messy, public. That night I sat at my desk in Nexa's quiet office. I looked out at the city lights and thought about the journey that had brought me here. From humiliation in that conference room, to building something new, to watching my former tormentor spiral into chaos. But now the stakes were higher. Miranda's arrogance was no longer just her own. It was tied to Drayton's corruption, to Lincrest's survival, to the livelihoods of thousands. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was revelation, and as I closed my laptop, one thought settled heavy in my mind. The next time Miranda stands in front of the board, she won't be standing alone. Drayton will be beside her, and when they fall, they will fall together. And I will be watching. I used to think revenge was about striking back, about plotting and delivering some clever blow that would leave your enemy reeling. But by the time Miranda's empire began to crack, I understood something else. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting the truth out, because the truth has claws sharper than anything you could design. The final unraveling began with a single word from the auditors. Fraud. Jonas called me that night, his voice trembling with both fear and relief. Clara, they said it, out loud, fraudulent reporting. They're opening a full-scale investigation. I closed my eyes and let the word echo in my mind. Fraud. For weeks, months even, it had all been whispers. Now it was fact, stamped and undeniable. And for Miranda, it was the beginning of the end. The next board meeting was brutal. Jonas described it to me in fragments, almost as if he couldn't bear to relive the whole thing at once. Miranda tried to charm them, tried to spin the narrative one more time. She raised her chin, flicked her hair back, and insisted the auditors had misinterpreted strategic reallocations. She used words like provisional and tactical and short-term volatility, but nobody was listening. The board turned their eyes to Drayton. He had always been calm, always deliberate, but that day his composure cracked. He stammered through explanations, his forehead damp with sweat. When pressed about the emails, he claimed they were taken out of context. Out of context. Jonas said you could feel the disbelief ripple across the table. Because there was no context that could justify altering revenue reports to cover losses. None. The silence that followed was louder than any accusation. News traveled fast. Within 48 hours, whispers had reached the financial press. Sources close to the matter hinted at impropriety at the highest levels of Lincrest Global. Stock prices fell another 12% overnight. Employees flooded job boards. Clients called to ask pointed questions. And through it all, Nex's phone kept ringing. We didn't even have to advertise. The more Lincrest sank, the more people wanted to distance themselves from it, and the more they sought us out. It was as if every ounce of credibility Miranda had destroyed floated our way like driftwood. But I didn't gloat. Not outwardly. I reminded myself to stay focused, to honor every client who came through our doors. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about shouting "I told you so." It was about building something so solid that no one could deny it. Still, I followed every update with keen eyes. The next escalation came when Adrian finally snapped. Jonas told me it happened during another emergency session. Miranda and Drayton had just finished another duet of excuses when Adrian slammed his fist on the table. Enough. That single word reverberated through the room. He accused them of dragging the company into disgrace. He demanded immediate resignations. The board murmured, some nodding, some pale with shock. But Miranda, in true Miranda fashion, refused. She stood, her voice sharp, declaring that she would not be made a scapegoat for the company's weakness. She accused Adrian of cowardice, the board of betrayal. And then, in a move that shocked everyone, she pointed at me, even though I wasn't there. This all started when you let Clara Henderson run wild, she spat. She infected this company with sentiment and chaos. And when she left, she took our foundation with her. When Jonas told me this, I laughed so hard tears stung my eyes. Even at the edge of ruin, she still blamed me. Drayton, however, wasn't laughing. The auditors pressed harder, and the more they pressed, the more he faltered. His once measured voice turned into babble, strings of jargon that didn't connect. Jonas said it was like watching a dam burst. Every sentence he spoke washed away more of his credibility. By the end of the meeting, the board voted unanimously. Both Miranda and Drayton were suspended pending investigation. Security escorted them out of the building. Jonas described the scene, Miranda with her head held high but eyes wild, Drayton pale as chalk, avoiding every gaze. Employees lined the hallways pretending to work, but their ears stretched to catch every echo of those footsteps. And then the doors closed. Just like that, Lincrest was leaderless. The aftermath was chaos. The press pounced. Headlines screamed about leadership scandal at Lincrest Global. Commentators debated whether the company could survive. Analysts speculated about acquisitions, layoffs, collapse. For me, it was surreal. I watched it all unfold from Nex's bright little office, sipping coffee as the world dissected the downfall of the woman who had once humiliated me in front of 20 colleagues. And I felt no guilt, because Miranda hadn't fallen because of me. She had fallen because of herself. Because of her arrogance. Because of her blind faith that fear and deception could hold power forever. But the story didn't end there. Jonas called again, his voice hushed but urgent. Clara, you should know, Drayton isn't going down quietly. He's threatening to reveal dirt on other board members. He says if he burns, they burn too. It didn't surprise me. People like him rarely accept blame. They spread it like wildfire, hoping the smoke blinds everyone long enough to escape. But this time, there would be no escape. The board had already involved regulators. Investigations were widening. The walls were closing in, and for once, there was no hidden hand to pull them back. That night, I lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling above me. I thought about the first day Miranda deleted my project. I thought about the humiliation, the silence in that conference room, the way my colleagues stared at the floor while my work vanished with a single keystroke. And now, years later, it was her work vanishing. Her reputation, her power, her carefully crafted illusion, deleted not by me but by the truth. I smiled to myself in the dark. The sweetest revenge had never been about striking back. It had been about walking away, building something better, and waiting for the truth to catch up. And now, it had. The morning after Miranda and Drayton were escorted out of Lincrest, the industry buzzed like a hive that had just been struck. News outlets plastered their faces across headlines. Commentators debated whether it had been incompetence or corruption. Some even speculated about an affair, though gossip didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Lincrest was bleeding and everyone could see it. For me, the strangest part was how quiet my own heart felt. I expected fireworks inside me, a surge of triumph. Instead, there was stillness, like a long-held breath finally exhaled. At Nexa, we kept moving forward. New contracts arrived almost daily. Clients spoke of trust, transparency, and authenticity, the very values Miranda had mocked. I led my team through project after project, and every success felt like another brick laid on a foundation no one could knock down. But the invitations surprised me. First, it was a regional conference asking me to speak about human-centered analytics. Then a trade journal wanted to profile me as one of the industry's most influential new voices. And then, the biggest shock of all, an invitation to deliver a keynote at the Global Innovation Forum in Geneva. I remember reading the email twice, then a third time, unable to believe the words. Clara Henderson, keynote speaker. The weeks leading up to Geneva were a blur. I worked during the day, rehearsed my talk at night. My theme was simple: technology must serve people, not the other way around. I wanted every executive in that hall to hear the truth Miranda had refused to see. On the flight to Switzerland, I gazed out the window at the endless stretch of clouds. I thought about my younger self, the woman who had stood frozen in that Lincrest conference room while her work was erased. She could never have imagined this moment, but I could almost see her sitting across from me, smiling, whispering, "We made it." The forum itself was dazzling. Grand halls filled with the hum of 1,000 conversations, screens flashing with bold slogans about the future. Leaders from every continent gathered under one roof. When I stepped onto the stage, a hush fell over the room. The lights were bright, but I could see the faces, curious, expectant, waiting. I told them my story. Not every detail, not every wound, but enough. I spoke about how companies lose their souls when they reduce people to numbers, how loyalty cannot be measured by efficiency metrics, how the future belongs to those who remember that behind every data point is a human being. The words poured out of me, steady and certain. And when I finished, the applause rose like a wave crashing onto shore. Later that night, in my hotel room overlooking the lake, I sat with a glass of wine and my laptop open to the day's news. One headline caught my eye: Miranda Vexley resigns from industry, cites personal reasons. The article was brief. She had been formally dismissed from Lincrest after the investigation confirmed misconduct. Drayton was facing regulatory charges, his career in ruins. Miranda, for her part, had issued a short statement about stepping away from the sector. No apologies, no reflections, just silence. I pictured her packing a box in some dim office, slipping out of a side door while cameras waited out front. I imagined the defiance still etched into her posture, but also the hollowness behind her eyes. And I realized then, I didn't need her apology. Her downfall was apology enough. A few weeks later, Lincrest announced it was being partially acquired. Parts of its operations were sold off to competitors, including to Nexa. When the announcement came through, Jonas called me, his voice brimming with disbelief. "Clara, we're literally absorbing them. Can you imagine?" I could imagine. And I smiled, because the company that had once tried to erase me was now feeding the company that had embraced me. It was poetic, almost too perfect. Months passed and life settled into something steady, something bright. Nexa thrived. My team grew, clients trusted us. And I carried with me a quiet truth: the best revenge isn't a single act. It's a life rebuilt so well that the past looks small by comparison. Sometimes, late at night, I think of Miranda. I wonder if she sits alone somewhere, still convinced the world was unfair to her. I wonder if she understands yet that she destroyed herself. But then I close my eyes, remember the applause in Geneva, the laughter in our Nexa offices, the warmth of clients who know they are seen. And I realize it doesn't matter. Because my story isn't about her anymore. It's about me. It's about turning humiliation into triumph. It's about proving that kindness is strength, that empathy is strategy, that resilience is the sharpest blade of all. And it's about this one undeniable truth: the sweetest revenge is success so radiant that your enemies fade into shadows.